looking at property, do you think it's only a passive investment or not?
Not at all. So I know we touched on this previously, and we said we'll elaborate on this. So for me, property isn't a passive investment, because that's something that I do every single day. So I study the market. I know what's going on in the market. Then every other market that you're going into, every other area that you're going into, it's a different market, different strategy, different approaches you need to take. So there's constant
There's active management involved. It's not passive.
Constant investigation, or what's the better word? Maybe
maintenance.
No. Constant R&D, research and development that you need to do. In any other area that you're going into, and every other sector that you're going into. So I had a call this week where an investor phoned me up and said he's looking for either student accommodation, development land, short-term leasing, or residential properties, that's below market. And I asked him straight up, but that's very strange, because normally a property investor will either be doing student accommodation,
correct,
or development, or res.
You will have your sector which you focus on.
There's a sector, because to go that broad, you're opening yourself up for so much risk. So then we had a chat, and we narrowed it down to student accommodation at the end of the day. So he's got some Airbnbs that he's doing short-term leasing, but now he wants to venture into student accommodation. So then it made more sense, because that's a different path that he's going into now. You can't just, you have to focus, and you have to make sure that you dial in on one specific sector of the market.
Become a master of that specific segment.
And then you can maybe branch out.
Just get the one right first and then branch out, instead of starting student accommodation.
That's where the R&D comes in, the research and development.
And I think at the Smart Network, what we also do with the property leg of the company and the property leg of the business, we do that. We actually go look at these different diversification vehicles.
That's what I do on a daily basis.
So and looking at putting all your money into one property, that's definitely a massive concentration risk. And we did touch on this before, and we'll probably touch on this going forward as well.
One property or one sector?
No. Moving from one sector to one property specifically, like investing in only one property, is that a risk?
So if I buy one residential property.
Correct. Is it because, remember, then location comes into play, the area, all of that comes into play. So maybe you put all your eggs in one basket to chunk all the money into that specific property. Yes, most of the time there might not be more money for additional properties, but I think it's something that you have to do your research and development on, to make sure that when you buy that one property, and you only maybe have funding for one property, that you buy it in an area which it's how can I put this?
Future growth,
and it's safer in terms of future growth. Not take a massive risk for the first
look again. Okay, so when you're buying into an area where you think there's going to be future growth, you're probably taking a little bit more risk.
Yeah, okay.
So it's probably an underdeveloped area. Look at areas where there's other developments going on, or redevelopments going on. A lot of because in Cape Town we only have so much land. There's sea, there's mountains, and little land. And then we've got the farms as well, where you cannot necessarily build on. So unless the urban edge moves. So
tell me another thing, how can you actually reduce the risk when you buy a property? How can you reduce that risk?
When buying or managing?
No, when buying a property, but let's elaborate on managing as well. So when you're buying a property, how can you reduce that risk? And when you are managing the property, how can you reduce that risk? Because it depends if you self-manage or using an agent, etc., etc. But let's go to the buying.
So I think with buying, it's just a matter of making sure you have all the numbers.
And screening the tenant, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, that's on the management side. So when buying a property, I always say, don't fall in love with the property, because a lot of people get emotional about it, and especially when you're in a market where there's a lot of demand and not that many stock, or that much stock, or people queuing up outside of our house. I actually went to a viewing yesterday where there was like probably 10 people at the same time looking at the same property, and then people get emotional and they want to put in an offer, and then that's where the problems comes in. That's where they end up overpaying for a property. Just because of it's like an auction almost. You get excited about it.
It's emotional, psychological. It's an emotional, psychological thing, which actually touches that emotional and psychological effect. That has an effect on any investment, actually. But we'll elaborate on
the psychology of money. So go and read that book for whoever hasn't read it yet.
Yeah, it's good. Very good.
So I always say, don't fall in love with the property. Fall in love with the numbers first, right? So it's very easy to get carried away emotionally. So that's the first thing. Then second thing with regards to, and that's something like it on a daily basis. But Albert, yeah, don't you have a lot of problems with your tenants, etc., etc.? And I always say the same story over and over. I would rather let a property stand vacant for a month or two even, because placing a tenant that's not correctly vetted, looking at the credibility and the affordability, that's the most important. That's the lifeblood of the business at the end of the day. So you have to make sure that your credibility and your affordability is done correctly. The vetting of the client. Once that is right and you've placed that tenant, you shouldn't. You've already mitigated your risk so much that look, anything can go wrong, but that is a very low risk investment.
Specifically if you rent it out yourself, I think what you need to do is.
I will not recommend that to anyone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, your business is at the end of the day doing all these things up front so that you don't have issues along the line.
Sorry to mention you, but I can tell you that most people, if not, I think almost 100% of people that I've ever spoken to that said, I've been in the business, I've had rental properties, I've had problems. Everyone that complains about a tenant, and I almost want to say this as 100%, is people that either rented out themselves, got the person on Facebook Marketplace or somewhere, or the internet somewhere, and the vetting wasn't done correctly. Yeah. If your vetting is done correctly, and I'm not saying going through an agency, the vetting is going to be done correctly. You must make sure that you partner up with the right agent or agency. Let's make sure that the vetting is done correctly, the affordability is done correctly. Once that is done, your risk is very low. And
again, you just mitigate your risk by following that steps.
Mitigate your risk, but remember now, if you, especially the market that we are in, so we're catering for the middle class person. So your normal worker type.
Yeah.
So they've got a salary, they've got a constant or a consistent income. That's fine. Anything can happen. They can lose their job. We understand that there is risk involved. We're all human.
Just touching on the risk topic, I think it comes down to the previous questions we had, or the previous discussion we had on when a COVID happens. It doesn't matter how good the vetting was, it doesn't matter how good the credit score was, it doesn't matter how good all these things was up front when you place that tenant. A COVID 2.0 happens, you're sitting in shit street basically.
And that is where, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is where you as a landlord needs to also, mitigate your own risk on your side, the things that you can, can have control over.
Making sure maybe there's some capital.
Because there's some things that you have control over, some things that you don't. So the things that you have control over, and that is where even us as an agency, where we rent out other people's properties as well, or manage their properties on their behalf, I often tell the agents that we can also fire a landlord.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have a landlord that's that's reliant on that rental income, because maybe it's someone that's got a normal 9 to 5, they've got one other property that they're renting out now. There is maybe a shortfall on that property. They need to get the rental amount in order to pay their bond, right? Having said that, now that landlord is putting pressure on you as the managing agent. Right. Okay, so you can also fire the landlord. Yeah. So you also have to. The landlord also, it's a business. Yeah, so you have to. It's a business you as someone that's investing in property, you need to mitigate your risk. You need to know it's a business. You need to know you have to make provision for vacancy losses. Okay, or a COVID, for example. And how you do that is two tips that I can give. One is registering your access bond, making sure you pay extra money into your bond so that you have that liquid capital that you can take out if need be. That's the one. The other thing is, tenant needs to pay before the 1st of every month, right? So sometimes it does happen where that money first goes into the managing agency's account and then only gets paid out to you. But now your bond has gone off.
No, your bond has gone off, exactly.
So that's a problem. So I always recommend making your bond go off a little bit later in the month. Let's say, for example, the 15th of the month. Okay. So by the 15th, at least your
payment should be in. Yeah.
Your rental amount should have been paid in, and that's also creating a bit of a cash flow for you, because that money comes in, your bond only goes off on the 15th.
Yeah.
So that creates the cash flow. So that's one way of
trying to mitigating the risk,
putting less stress on you as the landlord, and then, like I said, having an access bond, having some extra cash in that bond for liquidity
purposes.
Because
in a sense, and That's a very good tip, because in a sense you do find it that the tenant can be paid maybe a day or two late. The tenant pays over, it takes a day or two to clear by the bank. Now it's suddenly sitting on the 3rd of the month, and the bond went off on the 1st.
Look, and there's public holidays, and there's all of these things that we have to consider. So I would say by the 7th your money should be
Yeah.
at the latest.
Look, from a personal capacity, I like my debitors and things going off on the 1st of every month, but obviously for the business purposes, we've also got it as the 15th of every month.
Correct.
Just to give us that bit of a leeway. How easy or difficult is it to sell your property if you're in financial distress? If you urgently need money, basically.
Depending again where you are. If you're in Cape Town, it's fairly easy. I mean, especially now we are. I think we're living in a bit of a bubble here in Cape Town. We're living in our own country in Cape Town.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, I mean, if the property is priced right, it will sell.
Because why I'm asking that.
I demand.
Because why I'm asking
Anywhere in Cape Town.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
you do a
Because
bad area, doesn't matter.
makes sense. But why I'm asking that question is because if you have to put the property to market, it still takes time. It's not you're going to put it down the market tomorrow. It's going to be sold. In some cases,
You can sell it, but the registration is only going to happen in
registration
2 to 3
takes place.
months.
Then remember, there's
Correct.
occupational rent, all of
Yes.
that stuff. Maybe we can elaborate on that as well, because that's also something common that people don't realize, is that there's occupational rent to be
Yeah.
paid. Most people are like, what is occupational rent? So we'll discuss that as well. But looking at, again, from selling it or from putting the property on the market, and actually selling the property and moving out and the registration and transfer, all of that stuff takes time. So that's why I say if you're in financial distress, it becomes a problem at the end of the day. Yeah.
Look, okay,
You
so
want to be, if that's the case, you want to be on the other side of it, but you actually buy the property from the financial distressed person. But yeah.
look, there's many ways and means, but the long and the short is, I think, to answer your question, start maybe there's a cut in salary or whatever the case may be, or maybe it's a husband and wife, maybe one passed away or divorce
Life
or whatever
happens.
the case might be. So now all of a sudden they can't pay their bond, their commitments. People wait too long.
Yeah.
I see this so much in the industry. People wait too long because that's the last thing that they want to sell is the house.
Your house that you stay in, or your primary residence, and your pension at work. In those cases, for those that go, that's probably the two main assets that you've got.
you have, yeah.
And a lot of the time, people say that your primary residence is not an asset. I tend to agree and disagree with that. But at the end of the day,
Look,
it's that's the two big things that you've got.
yeah,
So
look, I think personally, if you own your property long enough to have capital appreciation, then it becomes an asset. But in the short term, it's not an asset because that's a big expense, especially in the beginning, because that's literally, I want to stay here and I can afford this, and now I'm
and
paying
also just something
50%
completely
of my
different.
salary to this.
Correct, and something
50%
completely
at least.
different now. If I look at it through a different lens, so to say, then if you, for instance, buy a property at a very young age, you are restricted in a sense to that property if it's for physical residence, and that's a big, I think. It's not really an opportunity cost, and maybe one can see it as such that you forgo by exploring and going into other sectors or other areas and moving around, etc. So that's also something, it ties you down quite a bit when you buy property at a very young age to stay in, and that's why probably most people prefer to rent first, see how the area is, check it out, is this where they want to stay, etc., etc. So they maybe rent for 1 year or 2 years and then they make a decision.
Yeah,
but that's also a risk, eh?
Depending on your discipline, I mean, there's many stories that jump to mind, but I also tend to agree that your first property, especially in your 20s, I think you should buy investment property instead of your permanent or your own private residence, if I could put it that way, family home. So getting that portfolio going, or getting that income generator going, because even if let's say you get your first salary and you can buy, remember I always say start with where you are.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to stay in a mansion, everyone wants to have this great life and stay in a good area and whatever the case might be. Your first property might not even necessarily be in a great area.
Stay within your means, basically.
Stay within your means, but start with where you are, and in 5 or 10, and I've seen this many times. So I'm very fortunate, I think, to have seen this personally, where people maybe come out of a not so affluent area, right? But they've purchased the property there, maybe small 2-bedroom house, whatever the case might be. They newly married, they could afford like a 600,000 rand house, for example, bought that property. Now 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years later, they've outgrown the property, outgrown the area, got a better job, obviously increase in salary, etc. their means are now much more.
Yeah.
And now they can either refinance or take capital out of that property, or they can sell that property and they have that
I have that equity. Yeah.
have that equity to go a little bigger. That's not necessarily even for investors. That's just normal people, staying in their first residential house, but they could
That's
sell
what you
that.
guys see
So that
often in the
already gives
market.
them a benefit. So, but the same person that did not buy that property in their 20s, for example, now they're in the 30s. Now they have the better job. They have the bigger vehicles. They have the kids now, but they didn't have that first property to sell. So they don't have that benefit that couple's got that sold that
Correct.
first property.
Correct.
Now, because there was capital appreciation on that first property. Doesn't matter what the area is or where the area is. The couple in the 30s, both in the 30s, the one that sold their property, they've got a capital injection. They want to buy in a better area. The same couple, their expense is going to be much more.
Yeah.
On a monthly basis. So already this one is ahead of the other one.
I think it's also it comes down to obviously preference, I think, initially, and it also comes down to your financial situation. Not all is the same. So it depends where you are at, on which side of the table you are.
Correct.
Renovations. It can become costly.
Very quickly. Yeah, so look, obviously when we do renovations, I always work roughly when I walk through the property, and that's where it comes in.
Can it be a financial? Can the renovations basically become a financial problem?
Detriment.
Yeah. Can it become a financial problem?
It can, but like I always say, so two things. Like I always say, property is very forgiving. So even if you do overcapitalize, now your renovation cost is going to exceed the market.
Or it takes a renovation, as we all know, and we've experienced this firsthand.
Yeah.
We're experiencing right now as we speak. It takes a bit longer than what you've initially planned for.
Correct.
Like it's almost like plan for it to not work out. Plan for the plan to not work out.
100%. But in that sense, property is very forgiving, depending on what you're going to do with the property. So in our case, even when I almost want to say overcapitalize for the current time in the market, if you wait long enough, and if it's in a capital appreciating area, that money will get returned. So if we buy, we renovate, we try to still remain, below the market value for the area. But if you do, it's okay. You just have to wait long enough.
And I think that comes down to the first question that we had with regards to, or the first discussion that we had with regards to when you buy that property, make sure you buy it at a good price. Because remember, if you still want to renovate and do all these nice and fancy things to increase the value and increase the demand on that specific property, whether that's additional units, whatever the case might be, just make sure that when you buy it at a good price, because come down the line, when you actually start renovating it, that cost can exceed your initial budget and plans.
Market value, yeah.
And then you'll be sitting with your margins not so high as what you initially thought. So that's stuff.
And I see that quite a bit, and that's exactly my example of earlier, where this property that I viewed yesterday with 10 people at the same time, going through the property. Now you get emotional, you put in an offer, and the offer might be too high, or whatever the case might be. Now you're sitting with it. Once you put in that offer, it's a 20-year commitment. Correct. At least, 20, 30-year commitment, however long. So you must remember that. And then now you start to spend money on it. And now you over-appreciate,
because maybe you've left it for too long as well, and now you have to renovate, but you properly have to renovate, and then it because stuff has broken down along the way, haven't been maintained, or hasn't been sufficient maintenance on, etc., etc. So that's. But I think also over time, what you'll also see, and what the viewers will see as well, is where we actually do the budget analysis of what we initially budgeted and what it actually cost us, and see the difference between the two and discrepancies, because that's also going to give you a cost. Because even ourselves, we are in buying property and developing it and renting it out. Even ourselves that in the game, we also over budget or under budget or overestimate or underestimate. And even though we know what's going on, there's still cases where you over or underestimate. You'll never get it perfect. You'll never have it perfect.
Get it perfect. On a second hand or old building, there's always something that jumps up.
Okay. You've just finished up everything, then a pipe burst, and or the
pipe,
geyser burst,
I wanted
whatever.
To say now, a pipe that maybe there's roots in it that there's no way
you've maybe replaced all the pipes around it, and then there's just one or two pipes that you have not replaced, or one or two things, and then literally as that tenant move in month along, then the pipe burst, and there's the issue. Yeah, I think, Albert, just to wrap up on this, tell me, getting emotionally invested into a property, that's never a good thing, eh?
No,
to be emotionally invested in a property.
Fall in love with the numbers first before you fall in love with the property. Again, it's very easy to overcommit yourself. But I just want to go back quickly. So that property I visited yesterday. So if that is a flip property that you want to buy, renovate and flip, then you need to make sure of your numbers.
Yeah.
Because if you don't want to hold on to it too long, you want to sell it for profit. So you need to make 110% sure and build in a buffer for if you over, you maybe have a budget of X amount, but build in a buffer if there's other unforeseen costs that you have to incur to make sure that you're still going to be able to sell for profit. That's a different situation. But in our case, where we buy property, renovate and rent it out, we can afford to wait a little bit longer for that appreciation and the money to come back, because we have the tenant in the property that's going to pay it, and we have the capital appreciation over a long period of time. We're not planning on selling. Different story, different type of renovation, different ballgame altogether.
I think it comes down to basically when you look at a home and it's an attractive home or an attractive house that you want to buy, it's not necessarily going to be that when it's attractive, it's going to be a profitable investment. And I think that's one thing that you need to take note of.
More often than not, that is not the
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, to never get married to a property, basically, or never get married to a stock in our industry, we say, because at the end of the day, it might disappoint over time. So know when to buy, know when to sell. That's basically what it comes down to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a wrap. Albert, thank you very much. Guys, on to the next one.